Andi, Mack, and Girl Meets World. Two hit Disney Channel shows that grab the hearts and minds of millions of fans around the world with their great characters, engaging stories, relatable life lessons, and heartwarming emotional moments. Both series have each been branded as strong family entertainment in their own right. But one question remains: which series was the best? Well, as the host of a channel that's made plenty of content that's reviewed both series over the years, I've actually been asked many times which show that I think is superior. I was even asked by many that question when Andi Mack first premiered, and it's easy to see why people ask that. Like Girl Meets World, Andi Mack was not about gimmicks. It had many of its plots revolve around strong life lessons, plus Andi Mack premiered shortly after Girl Meets World ended and actually inherited its old time slot when premiering in the USA. Andi Mack even got former Girl Meets World star Sabrina Carpenter to sing its theme, so it almost felt like both shows were sort of connected. However, there was no way that the two shows were going to be properly compared here until Andi Mack was done. It's simply unfair to judge a finished work with one that is still in progress. Well, now that both series are done, it's time to compare the two. And before anyone asks, no, I am not doing a Girl Meets World versus Boy Meets World video. Why? Because Boy Meets World wins really easily. Boy Meets World, at least in its later seasons, had the better acting, way better comedy, more dramatic and mature plots, and tackled a greater amount of complex issues. Now, if you want me to be nice to the other side, though, Girl Meets World in its early seasons was better than Boy Meets World was in its early seasons. Girl Meets World did feature a more realistically acceptable romance plot, and a handful of episodes in Girl did wind up holding up just as good as Boy was. It's just Boy Meets World was overall better. But let's get back to comparing Girl Meets World and Andi Mack. Today we're going to compare the two series through looking at each show's performances, briefly the directing, then how the stories unfolded with its characters, the impact it had on audiences overall, and finally, the character development seen in each series. And yes, there will just be one winner, no ties here, but please keep in mind, both series are amazing in their own right, and whichever series does not win should not be seen as a mark of shame. In contrast, we're comparing both shows today because, from many people's point of views, they're nearly evenly matched in quality. But one show is better than the other, and today we're going to find out which one it is. So, here we go. Round 1. Best Acting. Both Girl Meets World and Andi Mack had amazing actors on their shows and were highly beloved by their fans. Now, all the kid and teen actors in Girl Meets World could definitely handle what they were given and more. Rowan Blanchard's performance as a victim of bullying back in Girl Meets Rileytown should have gotten her an award, and Sabrina Carpenter, when she was given more emotional material to perform, should have gotten her multiple awards. Plus, the characters are pretty good delivering sarcasm at times, and of course the adult actors returning from Boy Meets World were great too. In particular, Ryder Strong as Sean Hunter, who ironically, despite the fact that he's retired from acting now, is the best actor of them all. Andi Mack similarly had its great pool of young and older actors too. The teens do pull off emotional moments well and handle very complex scenes with a natural ease. But what sets them apart is the more subtle stuff. These actors get more scenes where they have to express how they're feeling through just facial expressions and body language at times, and actress Leland Bowden as Bets is the absolute master of this. Just the way she moves and looks at things can speak volumes at times. Seriously, she deserves every acting award there is. So, for their ability to pull off more difficult material very naturally, Andi Mack gets the first point. Round 2. Best Comedic Scenes. Now, it's no secret Andi Mack and Girl Meets World do have their fair share of jokes. Andi Mack may not be labeled as a situation comedy show, but they ironically still find ways to add good humor. But rather than be loud and over-emote at times, they instead keep their jokes more subtle. The comedy comes more from the characters just interacting with each other and something naturally funny coming from that interaction. Girl Meets World, being a traditional sitcom though, features a lot more over-the-top wackiness and characters getting more loud than people typically do in real life at times. However, Girl Meets World also knew to have its comedy born from the interactions between the characters. Now honestly, not every joke in Girl Meets World works, but there are other times where the comedy is really good. Like, really, really good. So that being said, Andi Mack might have kept the quality of their comedy consistent, but Girl Meets World took more chances, and its reward was much more memorable funny scenes. Thus, Girl Meets World gets their first point. Round 3. Best Dramatic Scenes. Now, Girl Meets World may have been a sitcom, but it also got really serious at times. From Maya dealing with her daddy issues, to again, when Riley was dealing with her bully issues, to little Ava having to deal with her parents breaking up, the show really knew how to be really dramatic at times. And these scenes probably hit people hard because these characters were just being really goofy and funny in the previous scene, so to see them cry in the next just makes you feel more pain for them. And yeah, a handful of times, Girl Meets World will really make you cry. Meanwhile, Andi Mack does have its fair share of dramatic scenes too. Actually, a lot. But their dramatic scenes are more about impact. In Girl Meets World's more dramatic scenes, you can feel the tension slowly rising. In Andi Mack, their dramatic plot twists can really hit you hard, like when Andi finds out Bex is her mom, when Bowie and Andi first meet, to each time Cyrus Today coming out scene to one of his friends. These scenes only give you seconds to know something big is about to happen, thus they wind up becoming even more memorable. So yeah, because of that, Andi Mack wins this round. Girl Meets World played their dramatic scenes perfectly by the book, but Andi Mack changed the rules of the book to be just a bit better. Round 4, Best Direction. Now, this one might be a bit easier to pick out, but we'll still analyze everything anyway. Girl Meets World was filmed like a traditional sitcom, and the style of directing matches that. Now, the style of direction was much better than most other sitcoms that were on at the time, but because it was a sequel to a 90s sitcom, it had a particular old flavor it had to adhere to. Andi Mack, though, was a whole different ballgame. It obviously had higher production values, was filmed on location more often, and had a lot more sets to play with. Plus, the style in which the actors were directed wound up giving the show more of a slice-of-life feel. So, if you can't already tell, yeah, Andi Mack wins this round by far. By not looking like a traditional Disney sitcom, it instantly allowed it to feel more sophisticated and even more mature than Girl Meets World by comparison. Sorry to people who think this specific comparison was not fair, but that's the way it is. Andi Mack gets another point. Round 5, Best Romance Plots. Because every show that exists must have it at some point, Andi Mack and Girl Meets World obviously had some romance plots going on. In fact, both shows started off with their lead ladies crushing on a boy they just met in the first episode, and we even see those respective boys having other ladies in the show start to like them at different points. Plus, both shows had great romance plots with the adults. Sean and Katie's story of meeting and then marrying felt incredibly satisfying to watch, although Bex and Bowie having more screen time together feature a much more fleshed out take on the traditional adult romance tale, with an incredibly satisfying end to it. But with Girl Meets World, though, something changed late in Season 2 for the younger characters when the love triangle plot started. It was a very long, complex plot, but it worked because no character was trying to hurt the other. You see, in most romantic triangle stories on television, there's usually someone backstabbing another person or being of less virtuous character. Thus, it's much easier to determine which two in the triangle should end up together. Girl Meets World, though, did not have that. It was hard for the viewers to determine, or even agree on at times, who should end up with who, because all parties were very kind to the other. Thus, these characters were better role models to younger viewers watching. Romance is important, but not at the price of your morals and friendships. Andi Mack, meanwhile, went the more traditional route. Now yes, people were happy with the couples that did wind up being together, but as for their love triangles, yeah, it was obvious Amber was gonna get dumped by Jonah at some point, although Jonah winds up breaking with Andi later on, more than once, because drama. Yeah, the reasons for all of the teen romance drama in Andi Mack felt more forced at times. With just the young characters at times, it felt like all the romance drama was being more created to get a reaction out of the audience, rather than teach a good moral lesson or create good role model characters. Girl Meets World, though, from the get-go, felt like its romance stories were very integral to the plots and the life lessons it was trying to teach. Again, Andi Mack did have some good romance-related plots, especially with Bex and Bowie, but Girl Meets World handled all of their romance plots overall much better. Thus, Girl Meets World wins this round. Round 6, Best Story Arcs. If there's something that's better than a good standalone episode of television, then it's good story arcs that really make you want to come back for more. Now, for the most part, Girl Meets World featured more episodes that were standalone. Some episodes gave us important material that wound up being important later on, but most of the time, you could jump into most episodes and pick up quickly on what was going on. The only real story arcs in the series were Sean dating Maya's mom, the love triangle plot, and a few more small things that were more slow burning, such as Farkle's personality change and his relationship with Smackle. Andi Mack, however, obviously was a serialized show, so every episode was important to watch. And more importantly, it allowed for longer stories. In Andi Mack, you didn't have to solve the problem in half an hour. You had plenty of time to let the story naturally flow rather than be confined. The thing is, this can be a good and bad thing. In season 1 of Andi Mack, almost every scene of almost every episode was perfectly interconnected and served the series' greater narrative. But the thing with story arcs is, they have to keep being good for the series to be good. And in seasons 2 and 3, we got a few bad ones, like Andi and Jonah getting together and breaking up multiple times, Jonah then breaking up with multiple other girls, Buffy moving away, and then coming back an episode later like nothing had happened. Then there was Buffy dating Walker and creating tension that's almost immediately forgotten, and yeah, Girl Meets World had its bad stories here and there, but they were single episodes. If you saw a bad Girl Meets World story, you'd still want to tune in next week because a whole new tale was going to start. With Andi Mack though, if you were in the middle of a plot you did not like, oh boy, you knew you had several more weeks of this. So yeah, Andi Mack obviously had some really good story arcs, but it also had a few bad ones. Girl Meets World, though, knew to only bring in story arcs when it was important to the characters, such as the long arc that led to Sean being Maya's stepdad, and again, the love triangle plot. So, it might have had less of them, but compared to Andi Mack, Girl Meets World had a better batting average, and thus, Girl Meets World gets another point. Round 7. Best Landmark Achievements. Now, both shows are remembered for how they brought something different to the Disney Channel and family programming as a whole. Now first, what probably put Girl Meets World on the map with young fans that never saw Boy Meets World was how it portrayed tough, realistic family issues many viewers can unfortunately relate to, mostly with Maya's issues with how her mother was barely present at home and her estranged father. Plus, Girl Meets World dared to tackle the subject of the belief in God and how that affects your worldview. Now, these were things that had been done in children's and family television before. They just hadn't been done in quite a while, thus it meant a lot more for younger viewers. Andi Mack, on the other hand, though, went to places no family show, at least owned by Disney, had ever done before. This was immediately apparent in the first episode, with Bex revealing herself to be Andy's mother, and suddenly you realize, oh, this show is addressing teenage pregnancy. Then it went out of its way to address a young character being gay and coming out to his friends as such, and it also addressed the subject of panic attacks. Plus, to a lesser extent, it also addressed other subjects very few family shows have tackled, such as gun safety, disabilities, military families, and religious traditions. Now yeah, Girl Meets World was seen as groundbreaking, but that's probably because it was the first show in a while that was touching ground that hadn't been treaded on in so long. Andi Mack, though, truly was doing something different and new. Thus, Andi Mack gets another point. Round 8. Best Life Lessons. Now, it cannot be stressed how both shows should be commended forever for how important, relatable, and amazing their life lessons were. Girl Meets World and Andi Mack did more than entertain. They taught viewers morals and values that they will hopefully carry with them for the rest of their lives. And winning or losing this comparison should not diminish how those lessons impact their respective fans. Now, with that being said, to many people, Andi Mack should obviously win this round. Like it's already been said, the show addressed topics such as how to deal with the aftermath of a teenage pregnancy, dealing with a peer coming out as gay, and panic attacks. Girl Meets World, on the other hand, didn't tackle new problems showing up in society. Usually, it simply addressed social and human issues that have always been around. But the thing is, by being a show that addresses issues that have always been around, it kind of helps the show become more relatable, even years later. Now yeah, Andi Mack did address several issues that really matter to a lot of people, especially in our current day and age, and that should not be ignored. But Girl Meets World tackled a huge huge amount of life lessons that we'll always need to look back on and remind ourselves, including the importance of communicating with loved ones face to face, to being thankful to those that provide you regular day-to-day services, to owning up to your flaws, to the importance of being involved in political elections, to how to cope with being bullied, to forgiving people that hurt you greatly, to the importance of believing in God, to recognizing your own advantages so that you can help people that are disadvantaged, to just embracing growing up and taking on the world as you do. Andi Mack may have tackled several issues important to this generation, but Girl Meets World tackled tons of issues that are and will be important to every generation. And thus, that's why Girl Meets World gets the point for this round. And now that we're tied, it's time to finish this with a tie-breaking round recommended by the fans of both shows online. And so, here it is. Final round. Character development. Now, we already looked at the characters' performers, how funny they were, how dramatic they were, how they were directed, and what they learned. But now, let's look at which show had the development for their characters overall play out the best. Essentially, which series really made us feel like, in the end, we saw these characters really evolve, change, and grow for the best. Because if a journey ends with a very satisfactory level of growth for a group of beloved characters, then flaws in the story can be ignored to a certain extent. First, let's look at the Girl Meets World characters. Riley and her friends on the show could often be seen as behaving pretty consistent throughout the series, but they still did change. Riley may have always been a kind, caring person, but started the series out afraid to assert herself. However, she eventually became more confident in her developing identity. Meanwhile, Maya's outlook on life did dramatically change throughout the series, learning to be hopeful that things would get better, and in a roundabout way, after becoming too much like her best friend, then learned to still hold on to parts of who she was. Farkle, meanwhile, aesthetically went through many changes, but in the end was the same loyal friend he'd always been, only now he was more relatable and knew how to better connect with people around him better. Lucas, though, didn't change that much at all. He was a real nice guy when he was first introduced, and was a real nice guy when the show ended. Outside of choosing Riley over Maya, he never really experienced that much change in character. Meanwhile, most of the adults were also pretty static throughout the series, not learning or changing much, but still had great words of wisdom to share, the exception being Sean and Katie, who both started out in the series lacking hope that they could be happy one day, only to find that happiness finally in each other. And like Maya, Sean probably experienced the best and most complex growth in the entire series, as he tried to find the proper balance between how much he should be like those that positively impacted him and how much he shouldn't. Meanwhile, on Andi Mack, those characters all changed a great deal, with a little exception though. Yeah, if there was one character who was pretty static on Andi Mack, it was ironically Andi Mack. She just didn't change that much throughout the series. If she seemed to be more confident throughout the show, it's because she became more confident at complaining more and more often, jumping to conclusions about people around her, and still being uncertain about many new choices she had to make, such as going to that magnet school. Yeah, she was more often than not a loyal friend and cared about her community. But she was like that in the first season, and wasn't really that different in the third season. However, it's a different story with many of the other characters. Buffy may have had screen time wasted on moving away and dating Walker, but she did change a lot in how she interacted with people overall, learning to embrace humility and letting others share in her responsibilities. Cyrus, meanwhile, started off being very awkward and uncomfortable in himself, but over time began to recognize his strengths and became more confident in his skills and identity. Jonah, on the other hand, though, became less confident as the series went on. However, that can still be seen as a realistic teenager's natural realization that they aren't as in control of the world as they once thought, and are more fallible than they originally believed. A tough but still important lesson that young viewers need to learn. As for the adult characters, Celia went from being an incredibly strict and single-minded individual to being a more carefree and open-minded person. Bowie, on the other hand, was pretty much the same character the whole time, a really nice, caring guy that wanted to be a good father and husband. He simply only had to learn how to accomplish those roles the right way. The same could also be said for Ham whenever we saw him on screen. So yeah, Girl Meets World and Andi Mack each had one young character and some adult characters that didn't change too much, while everyone else did quite a bit. However, there's still one special person from Andi Mack we haven't discussed yet: Bex. Now, when the show first began, Bex was portrayed as being a little too carefree. She didn't just pretend to be Andy's older sister. Maturity-wise, she was just an older sister. Bex was a fun person to be around, but didn't fully understand responsibility and maturity. Throughout the course of the series, though, she became an incredibly responsible and mature individual. First, she owned up to being Andi's mother. Then she took steps to being engaged in the many areas of Andi's personal life. Then she got a job. Then she attempted to raise Andi and own a home all on her own. Then she began her own business. Then became confident enough to want to marry Bowie. And then finally, they got married. Bex is the definition to what good character growth looks like. She started in a rough, undesirable place, something many viewers can unfortunately relate to, but through many realistically made choices viewers themselves could make too if they had to, Bex eventually brought herself to a place in her life any viewer watching could respect. And that's not just good television we're talking about anymore. That's an effective way to tell a story that teaches people that they too can pick up the pieces of a messed up situation they're in and rebuild their lives for the better. And that is the final deciding factor that shows Andi Mack had much more compelling character growth overall in its series, which means it wins this round. Which also means that the final result of this competition is that Andi Mack is the winner.
All the way.
And so there you go. Andi Mack is indeed the superior program. But does that make it a perfect show? Well, no. As stated throughout this video, Andi Mack had its share of flaws. In fact, if you really want to see some good family shows that have much less flaws, check out Gordimer Gibbon's Life on Normal Street along with Just Add Magic on Amazon Prime. Those series are actually much more consistent in their quality. Or if you want to see a TV series that features much simpler but still relevant life lessons for all ages, check out Disney's new sitcom Sydney to the Max, which features a very tight-knit and morally strong family. However, if you want family television that takes more chances and has better peaks in quality, Girl Meets World and Andi Mack are still a better way to go. So anyway, I hope you all enjoy this in-depth comparison of these two family shows. If you disagree with anything in this comparison, remember, you are indeed entitled to your own opinions. And again, if either show greatly impacted you in a positive way, don't let anyone rob you of that impact. And if you want to hear me talk more about Girl Meets World or Andi Mack, or the underappreciated family shows Gordimer Gibbon's Life on Normal Street, Just Add Magic, or Sydney to the Max, then be sure to check out the many other videos on my channel. But until then, keep on growing for the better as you take on the world all the way.